Please welcome to the stage VP of Client Development at CJ, Monique Zapata-Kaufman.
Hello, hello. Welcome, everyone. As mentioned and pronounced correctly, which I appreciate, Monique Zapata-Kaufman is my name. I'm a diversity and inclusion champion at CJ. Along with many stakeholders at CJ, I lead our efforts for DE&I. It's focused on education and resources, cultural celebrations, as well as community outreach. And I work very closely with our executive leadership team on those efforts. So I'm very, very excited to be here to sort of represent this conversation and work alongside my panelists who will meet shortly. Really excited to be here in person. So it's been a long time coming. You know, we've all been locked up at home, so now we're free, raging here at CJU, which is awesome. Today we will be discussing a necessary topic of how digital marketing organizations are and should be ensuring that they are approaching their marketing internal efforts with a discernment of inclusive and diversity. You know, this can include many different areas and facets and platforms of education or cultural celebration. So, you know, sometimes showcasing empathy and accounting for all walks of life can really feel overwhelming. And to incorporate into your business practices can sometimes feel even more overwhelming. You know, how do we move forward? How does the beginning of that journey take place and evolve? So today we will be discussing a lot around the cycle of this journey and the constant state of doing and learning and receiving feedback welcomely and openly. So real quick, raise sort of your hands, a survey of the group. How many of you all are currently participating in any sort of DE&I focused efforts today across your organization or within your marketing efforts? Okay, we've got about a 50-50 split, maybe a little bit more 40-60. What's great about that is you all showed up. You wanted to hear about this topic. You know, it looks like a majority of our room isn't doing any sort of specific efforts today. And so hopefully today's conversation really helps you on your journey and how to get started, how to operationalize, and, you know, just some considerations and learnings to take forward. So hopefully this is helpful for everyone today. I have the thing, okay. So I'm gonna welcome my panel up here today to join me. I'm gonna sit way over here. Awesome. Well, welcome. I'm gonna let you all introduce yourself. Please tell the audience, you know, a little bit about yourself and how your organizations are focusing on DE&I today. Start with you, Frances.
So I'm Frances. I'm the Senior Social Media and Influencer Marketing Manager at Paula's Choice. I've been with Paula's Choice for about 8 years, and I've spent the last 4 years in the US building out our social media and influencer marketing strategies. And I'm going to be really focusing in on our On the Rise program, which our organization started to better support Black content creators. And I'm really excited to share it with you all today.
Awesome. All right, over to you, Dennis.
Hi, I'm Dennis Day, founder of a company called Certify. You might have heard it from Kelly earlier today. Basically, you know, I'm a first-generation Asian. My parents were immigrants. Literally, dad came off the boat. And I've always been struggling with this notion of, you know, living in a Western culture, being, you know, parents and my family from an Eastern, and sort of, you know, having that conflict, right? And I think a number of people as immigrants, you know, have that conflict of where do you sit in this environment. And I was almost to a point of almost being shamed, actually. And as I've gotten older, I've come to a full appreciation and embrace my Asianness, right? And I'm here to see, you know, I'm excited to see what kind of impact I can make in the social fabric around this topic.
Awesome, thank you, Dennis.
And then, hi everyone, I'm Julia Merritt. I am the director of I am the director of retail partnerships at Expedia Group with a lot of my team here, so thank you guys for all coming and being a part of this. I've been with Expedia Group for a little over 3 years. Outside of my traditional kind of like day-to-day, I'm actually a very proud member of one of our inclusion business groups. I'm actually an AIM. lots of acronyms, I know, but AIM actually stands for Ability Inclusion Movement. I'm actually even a part of a subset within AIM that is for parents and caregivers of those with disabilities and differences. I am not biased at all, but I am the proudest mom to the cutest kid in the world. I have an 11-month-old son who was born with some brachydactyly, which is an upper limb difference. And so over the course of the past year and a half or so, the ideas and the topics around accessibility, mobility, and inclusion have obviously become incredibly important in my day-to-day life. So I'm thrilled to not only get to share with you guys all today a little bit more about what Expedia has been doing and the great work in the I&D space, but then also just so honored to be a part of this panel and get to promote such an important topic. And so thanks, Mo, for having us.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you. Julia rolls deep with her hype group. I forgot to bring mine with me. So, CJ people, step it up. Thank you. All right, so jumping right in. You know, many businesses today are not really asking themselves if they should be engaging in DE&I, right? They are asking, how do I do this? How do I do this from an organizational standpoint? How do I do this as a marketer? So tell us a little bit about how your organizations really started their journey today. Julia, I'll start with you.
Sure. So Expedia Group's been on a multi-year journey when it comes to DE&I, I&D, et cetera. I think what they've done really well in the place that we're at today is that EG prioritizes DE&I at the very highest levels. And so within our org, the team that's responsible for I&D, the leader of that group actually reports directly into our CEO, Peter Kern, instead of them reporting into like a different functional unit. And so if you think really at the table, I&D has got a seat at like the very, very highest levels. You know, in organizations like EG, or really any organization, culture typically tends to start from the top. And so the benefits of I&D having this huge seat at such a prominent place is that there really is a trickle-down effect that goes to every single employee globally that really sends the message that this is important, and then employees are allowed to feel empowered to lean in on this and prioritize it, not only in their actual like, day-to-day work, but also in their lives. So I think that's really important.
Yeah, absolutely.
One other thing, like the going back to the idea of the journey, this doesn't happen overnight, you know, where we're at today. So one of the IBGs that I had listed before, we actually just launched a new one a couple weeks ago called, again, another acronym, IDEA, which is Indigenous Diversity Expedients and Allies. And their whole goal is to represent the underrepresented population around Indigenous. So that now takes our total up to 8, which again, those didn't all happen overnight. It's been a journey to get to those 8, and I'm sure if we look forward into the future, we'll continue to invest in this space.
That's awesome. What I love about those internal groups is very similarly at CJ under the Publicis group, we have 16 what are called business resource groups. And it builds like such a wonderful sense of community, of being able to sort of connect with others who are in very similar situations or communities as you are. So I love that piece. Francis?
Yeah, so representation of our community and our consumer in our social feed, like within our influencer community, and like paid campaigns has always been really important. But we really started listening to some of the conversation that was happening in our community around like the barriers that Black content creators often face. So often overlooked for opportunities, or when they are considered, they're underpaid or not paid at all. So about 3 years ago, we launched our On the Rise program, which is designed to support and amplify the voices of Black content creators under 30,000 followers. And some of the things that we do with this program is masterclasses, offering one-on-one mentoring calls, like in-person meetups, a paid content partnership, as well as kind of just general community support from each other. So that's kind of how we got going.
Yeah, awesome. What I love about that program when you were first telling us about that was that it was a way to elevate that group who just needed the extra resources, the extra support. So that's really great. Dennis?
Sure. I started my internal journey at American Express. I was an exec there in the 90s, so I probably look a lot younger than I am. And I ran I was asked to run the Asian diversity group, and this is in the 90s. So these groups have been in existence for decades, right? And I had the privilege of working with a great group of people, and we had the ability to impact 80,000 people at American Express around this notion of Asian diversity, right, across the various events, across representation. And I came to the conclusion a couple of years ago that, okay, that's fantastic. This is absolutely critical. But also, there's an ability to drive even greater impact. Amex has 30 million small businesses, corporations, consumers. You might have some cards in your wallet. Sorry, the Cap One folks that might be in the room. But if you actually think about it, it's like, how do you solve for this, right? And how do you make an impact? So I'm going to ask two quick questions here. How many people in the audience want to support small and diverse-owned businesses, whether it be women, LGBTQ+, Black, Hispanics? Raise your hands, right? Majority of you folks, right? And then the second question is, okay, listen, if I'm surfing online, or if I'm walking down the street, I'm in New York, and I go around, it's like, my daughter says, well, why don't you support the women Hispanic business, right? It's like, I don't know where they are. So how many people who's surfing or walk around can actually find these businesses, typically? Raise your hand. It's like nobody, just maybe a little. That's what we're trying to solve. 80% of consumers want to support companies based on their beliefs and value system. A lot of it's diversity, obviously, but you can't find them. And that's the reason why we came to this conclusion of creating this business, and now we're proud to be and honored to be working with CJ to identify those small, diverse-owned businesses.
Yeah. The burning question for many in the audience or even organizations is, how do we get started, right? Like, how do you operationalize efforts focused on DE&I and ensuring that you are continuously building a flow of community and inclusiveness? So how do you do more not only to feel impactful, but also drive more impact? How do you get started? So Julia, I'd love to start with you.
Sure. So kind of to what I mentioned a little bit before, what it's done really well at Expedia is setting that tone from the very, very top. Not only does IND have that seat at the table, but for all of those IBGs that I had listed out before, each one of them is given a dedicated executive sponsor from the exec leadership team to make sure that they are overseeing all of the metrics, the success, the investment of that IBG, and make sure that that IBG is able to flourish and grow internally. They have metrics just like every other business unit that we have. So making that not just seat at the table, but also making sure that there's accountability at the top has been what's driven a lot of the success at EG. On the flip side, though, that's the top-down approach. As I mentioned before, I'm part of the ability inclusion movement, and I think there's a lot of emphasis we can put on movement. And so how that group came to be is a lot of employees getting together and banding together to promote a specific cause. So that was really more of like a grassroots sort of led approach. So what I would say is, how do you get started? If you can think about the two different paths, how to enforce this from the top, but also providing the space and the openness for employees to kind of help define what that looks like within your individual organization. Those two combined, you're definitely on your way to success.
Yeah, when I think about like grassroots or employee-led, I immediately think about your program at Paula's Choice, because it was very much a small but mighty team who sort of saw this as a need and worked on this. So tell us a little bit how you all started that program.
Yeah, so once we'd ideated it, it kind of came to life in about a month. And the way we did this is we kind of were like, well, what can we impact, and what resource do we have a team? Like, what skills do we have that we can offer this group of people? So that's kind of how we were able to kind of launch it so quickly, is because we didn't really rely on anything from outside teams or outside agencies. At Paula's Choice, we also work with an agile way of working, which meant that like within our own work, we could plan it out in a really clear way. And if we did need resources from other teams, we were also able to kind of plan that in. And then in terms of budget, we reallocated budget from our existing like pot with leadership kind of sign off. And then sort of as the program's proven itself out over the last 3 years, we've been able to increase that spend.
Awesome. When you think about getting a program started, so let's say you've got these initiatives underway, you really identify what are their core focuses. As marketers, we continuously want to measure output, right? We can't help ourselves. And so how do you know you're headed in the right direction? You know, based on any initiatives or different outreach programs that you put together. Who is sort of tracking that measure of success? You know, how do you sort of make sure you're always sort of headed in the correct direction, depending on what that focused effort is? So Dennis, my lover of metrics, I'd love to hear from you first on this.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, you know, with respect to data and measuring things like probably most people in this room being performance marketers, right? You know, you look at a lot of the corporate diversity scorecards. Majority of them right now, if you take a look at them, just go online, Google them. You can see dozens of them. You know, Toyota, you name it, and it talks about employee representation, which is absolutely critical, right? What's my split between the different genders, race, whatever it might be? You know, what's my training metrics? What's my hiring metrics? The second one is around supplier diversity. One thing that it typically lacks, and if you take a look at chief diversity officer surveys, it's around, you know, driving the business case around their customer. So around customer diversity, the lens I take about it is basically any metric you do in your day-to-day life today, right? And so if you're, let's just say, an advertiser. Hey, listen, I'm going to, you know, or let's start with publisher. I'm a publisher. You know, my audience really cares about, you know, as I said, you know, 80% care about diversity. So I might promote today, this month, is Hispanic Heritage Month. Why am I not promoting the fact that there are Hispanic-owned businesses out there, and I can promote them and drive volume to that population? 10 of the 12 months, there is something going on. Women History or Black History for February, Women's for March, API, Pride in June, and the list goes on, right? Veterans Day. So you can drive all your metrics, see what your performance metrics look like. Publisher side, you know, what are you approving? Like, what population are you approving? Kelly said today, I totally blew me away. 60% of volume is from new publishers. So are you approving all the women-owned businesses? Are you actually driving promotion to them? The 42% of small businesses are women-owned. Huge, huge population, right? Mm-hmm. And then from a brand perspective, you know, corporations are heavily focused on brand appeal, brand satisfaction. How are you measuring it? How are you taking a look at your belief systems and value systems? And are you seeing lift in those behaviors? So to me, it's about all the day-to-day metrics, just like you would measure and do slices on your segmentation around gender, age, geo, whatever it might be. All you're doing is a slice on diversity.
Yeah. And when I think about, you know, the metrics, there's also that side of, you know, feedback, right? Sort of surveying that audience and understanding what they're really looking for. And I think about the Paula's Choice program because I know a lot of it stemmed from sort of an origination of getting feedback first. So would love to hear a little bit about how you all use that to kickstart those efforts.
Yeah, so I think the goal of this program is to really drive impact with the participants. So we really look at qualitative data. So we survey the participants each year and just find out what's been working for them, what they would like us to do different. We've also been lucky enough to have direct feedback from participants as well that's been really informative. And then we also look at like how many applications do we have year over year? Is this still something that the community wants? And I think another really important piece of it has been being very like self-critical as a team and just kind of asking ourselves what's working, what's not, like, and just like really dig into that just to make sure we really are delivering like the most impact. It's really important for us as a team that like what we're doing is valuable. So that's kind of really what drives us and helps us kind of make those improvements.
Thinking about that self-critical piece, I have a quick follow-up for you. So you had talked about how you all enlisted, you know, an agency to support you with sort of asking those tough questions, right? What are the right questions we should be asking ourselves so that we are making sort of the proper steps to go forward based on the feedback we have? So curious to see how that process has been. I know you all are still very much in the beginning stages of that, but curious to understand, you know, how they're challenging you all to sort of ask yourselves the tough questions.
Yeah, so more broadly within the work we do with influencers and our social content, we're kind of always asking ourselves questions, like not only at the planning stage, but also kind of like at execution, like at review stage, and always kind of pausing and just kind of reflecting. And those questions can come from like different like team members. So what we're doing with our DE&I consultancy is they're just kind of formalizing a framework of questions that our team and other teams can kind of ask themselves, just so that it's like, it's not just a team member kind of thinking of the question. Mm-hmm. It's like, it's there. We can just refer to this framework and make sure we're not missing anything.
Yeah. Julia, anything to add here?
I think Yeah, like I kind of mentioned before, we have, within our IBGs, we have specific metrics and setting specific goals too, the same way that you would any other business. So some of the goals for our IBGs for this upcoming year are to have 2 out of every 5 employees participate in at least one IBG, and then make sure that every single IBG has a global presence in each one of our global offices. So we're going to continue to track that and measure performance on that internally throughout the year.
Okay. So I'm hearing a little bit of goal setting, a little bit about feedback-driven decisions to kind of know how to move forward. Okay, awesome. So, one of the things is sort of that a lot of marketers in the room today are thinking, well, how do I market to everyone? Is that really feasible? From an external perspective and being able to market to our consumers, how should we as marketers be doing it smart, but also thoughtfully? So whoever would like to, Julia, if you'd like to start there.
Totally. So this is where within Expedia Group, those IBGs really can start to shine and drive significant value. And so EG taps into each one of them for not only like a local level country perspective, but also looking at all of them to add diverse perspectives on essentially everything that we really do. Expedia Groups, we're in the business of powering global travel for everyone, everywhere. And we really, really mean it when we say everyone. Globally speaking, there's 1.3 billion people that have a disability. And that population spends about $95 billion annually on travel. This group loves to travel just as much as everybody else. So one of the things we think about is really making sure, how do we show up as a multinational, huge organization to deliver on this specific set of customers' needs in the moment that they need it. If you were to look, putting this into practice, if you go onto Expedia.com today and you're searching for a property, there's actually a whole specific set of accessibility filters that are available on all of those properties. And it's not just kind of the standard, ADA accessible rooms that you could be searching for. It's, is there wheelchair parking available or handicap parking available? Is there wheelchair access? Is there ramp access to every single entrance on the resort or property? Is there roll-in showers available in every specific room? And it gets to such an amazing, granular level that there's even a filter around if there's sign language capable staff on site and if service animals are welcome on property. So these things, if you really think about it, this is a make or break component of a travel experience. So we need to get that right 100% of the time. And it's in partnership with AIM that this whole filtering capability was set up.
Yeah. So Francis, tell us a little bit about, is marketing really feasible to the masses? What has been that sort of focus for Paula's Choice?
Yeah, so I think we believe that it is, and I think I kind of touched on this earlier, but it's something that we think about in the UGC, that we feature on our social feeds, in our influencer campaigns, paid partnerships, and that's kind of where doing it smart and thoughtfully is really important, thinking about it at the planning stage, but also kind of at the review stage, and really having those frameworks in place, aiming to have those frameworks in place so you can ask yourself those questions.
Yeah. And Dennis, I feel like you're kind of a nice in-between point here. You're sort of a connector as well. We've got sort of Paula's Choice with a lot of external marketer efforts, and then a lot of the internal focuses along with the marketing. So would love to hear your point of view as far as you and Certify trying to connect those dots for folks as well.
Yeah. As you mentioned, I'm a data person, I'm a stats person, geek, whatever you want to call it. So here's a bunch of metrics that might be helpful. 72% of people want to support companies that share similar values, beliefs, as I mentioned. Walmart did a study, 90% of women would go out of their way to support women-owned businesses. 70% of Americans would support and want to buy from a veteran-owned business. There's been a 16% increase in purchases of consumers wanting to go to Black-owned businesses over the past couple of years. So to me, diversity is mass now. I don't filter it any differently. I think about this large population who wants to support these businesses, right? So then the key becomes, okay, how do you start sub-segmenting? How do you start targeting these populations? I think the journey starts with identifying them, right? And getting them into your CRM. So just like you try to collect emails, every single company's been trying to collect emails for 30 plus years, right? Same thing, how do you identify your customers? How do you understand their likes and their profiles? And then be able to leverage that data into your day-to-day operations. So to me, mass, the population is en masse at this point in time.
Yeah. So, looking at your experiences so far, as an active ally, and looking at your crystal ball, if you will, for the room, where would you say advertising and marketing is headed, with a focus and a necessity on DE&I within, advertising as well as internal? So, Frances, would love to hear from you first.
Yeah, so I think that ensuring that the work that you're doing is not performative and not self-serving will be really important. I think it can be quite easy to slip into that. And then also, I think, going kind of beyond gender and race in terms of representation.
Great. Julia?
So I think that it comes back sort of full circle to what we were talking about in the beginning, that this is definitely a journey that all organizations are on, and it's a continuous evolution, and I think just recognizing that is a huge step forward in and of itself.
Yeah.
That there will consistently be more and more work to do as this becomes more and more commonplace in more and more organizations. If I did have the magic crystal ball that you're talking about, I would love to believe that if we come back for CJU 2032 in 10 years, that we don't even need to have a panel around DE&I because it just had become so ingrained in everything we do as a society, but also thinking about it from a business standpoint, putting it in our metrics, making it a marketing priority, that it's just so commonplace that it's not even anything that we have to think about anymore. That would be my crystal ball, sort of dream world state.
Yeah. Dennis, thoughts?
I love Julia's crystal ball. I want her crystal ball. We're going to Vegas tomorrow. So I think it's a journey as well. So as I mentioned, I ran the Asian diversity group at American Express in the 90s. I also ran digital way back then at the same time. And I used a compare and contrast of those two journeys. Back then, digital groups were centralized. It was run centrally out of Amex in specific groups. And now, 30 years later, 20 plus years later, digital is inculcated in everybody's life. It isn't, there is no central group. Everybody thinks about it digital. Everybody thinks about all these, their activities around this notion of digital. Diversity is taken a little slower path, a steady path at least. And I think, with the amplification of diversity issues and the focus over the past couple of years, I would sure hope that journey continues to accelerate so that, Julia's vision comes to fruition. We don't have a central ERG groups or what all the various acronyms everybody's using. There is no diversity scorecard. We're looking at this like we would do from any other business angle. And I think that will really advance the dialogue and advance the social impact we all make.
And I think, too, if there's one thing I can add on this, is I think to the future, I think we need to recognize there's a lot of societal change that's going on when it comes to this space and how important and valuable it is to us as individuals.
Yeah.
And I think companies and organizations need to realize that and lean in on that when it comes to talent retention. If this is really important to me as an individual and my company values the same things, I'm much more likely to want to give my all to this company and drive loyalty to the company and then stay there. And I think that at the end of the day, this is incredibly important for a whole plethora of reasons. At the bottom, though, we're also all businesses, and we want to ensure that we have all of the best talent. And so being required, I think it will naturally become a requirement as the employees really show up and say that this is something that they want.
Yeah.
Oh, can I compound on that? I love it. I totally get it. I can keep on going on this dialogue. Oh my God. I'm probably older than most people here. I have a 23-year-old daughter, Gen Z, millennial, whatever bucket they, and you talk to all their friends, they're absolutely choosing companies based on social values and what they're doing. They're bouncing from companies. I don't agree with what they're doing. I'm out. You see the cancel culture, you see like the big media, social networks out in the valley being, sort of revolted against. People are making decisions in companies significantly. I think it's just going to get, more and more. I gave you that stat of 72%. You look at that population for millennials, it's 80 to 90% at this point in time. And so they're really, talking the talk and taking action. So.
Yeah. I think a lot of what I'm hearing is to get to Julia's crystal ball. She is the guiding light of her scenario, but the feedback-led decisions I think is really critical. Being able to make people feel seen is really part of that feedback loop that you really need to have implemented first. Shooting in the dark is not going to be the right approach ever when it comes to DE&I. And so making sure that if you're focusing on bringing on board diversity into your organization, you are equally as focused on retaining them. And part of that means making them feel included, right? And so I think about your example that you just gave around, you feel more loyal to that company if you feel supported by them. That is a huge critical piece. But even similarly from a consumer standpoint, right? Where they are willing to spend their money really matters based on who you are as a company. The bottom line can no longer just be the only thing being driven. It's about who you are culturally. So I think that's really, really critical in a lot of what I've heard today. So, we're very close to wrapping up, but I'd love, to kind of give some considerations and final points from you all. Just any level of, encouragement for people to kind of take away from this talk today that, you feel is really important to share as they sort of go forward on their own efforts within their organizations. Any thoughts? Want to start with you, Julia? You look itching, ready to go?
No, I think that it's change, and for a lot of people and a lot of organizations that may be starting at a place that's maybe not as advanced as what they would want. I think it can easily be frustrating sometimes for people to not see the big changes that they're anticipating. But what my recommendation would be, and it kind of goes to what Lovey said this morning, is think about the micro moments and how can you just continuously build and build and build on that? Because through all those micro moments, change within your organization can be accomplished. And I wouldn't set specific, targets like, oh, if I don't hear back and this isn't successful within 30 days, I'm just going to abandon it and go and try and do something else. So I'll tell you, I've been part of the AIM group within Expedia for a year and a half almost now. And I finally got the opportunity the other day to meet with the leader of the group and tell him just how impactful it was in my life. And not as an employee, but as a new mom. And he was like, this is amazing, I had no idea. And so he's been leading this team and this organization for a long time. And so he never knew how much it meant to me until a year and a half after I joined. So again, it's like you might not see the fruits of all of your labor in this space immediately, but I would just recommend to keep at it, keep at it, keep at it, and the change will happen, even if it's not in the big moment, but the micro moment.
Yeah. Any advice or anything to share, Dennis?
Yeah, I think building on what Julia said, I think it's kind of honing in on like what you can control and what you can do, and not needing it to be like a massive change all at one time, and just kind of thinking what you can do, and kind of just start there.
Yeah. Awesome. Anything to add?
I don't think there's anything different other than just reinforcing, like, listen, I totally agree. And what Lovey said today really sort of hit home, for me at least. So my father, as I mentioned, came off the boat in a nickel mine, became a doctor, went to philanthropy for child health, and I was like always looking at him, I was like, God, how can I make a bigger social impact? I got to do something big. I got to do something. And then I came to the realization, it's like, it's because I'm a New Yorker. I live in New York the past 20 years. You see acts of kindness every single day, and it's such a beautiful thing. I see a gentleman clean off, like in the subway, water on the chair for this woman. I see somebody going grab, you see the same homeless person there every day, right? See a person, drop off a muffin, like those beautiful moments, and you don't realize the compounding impact each of those things. I think you used the word butterfly effect earlier, and as Lovey said, it's like those small little actions. I think they just compound, and I've come to a realization it doesn't have to be big. It can be a collection of many, many small, consistent, I think is the words that she used, that aggregate out. And if everybody does that, obviously this world becomes much better, right?
Yeah. I think my sort of parting words on this front would be, we've been focused at CJ around launching DE&I focused efforts and working with a lot of different walks of life, different levels of their career. And, the biggest part of me leading this effort oftentimes was encouraging them, in the sense of you're not going to always do it perfectly. You're not going to always maybe say the exact right thing that you should say. But the fact that you are opening yourself up to be an ally and want to learn more is really what this is about. We talked a lot about this when we were prepping for this session, was a lot of doing and learning, and the fact that it is a journey and it will sort of always be a journey, just like sort of life is, right? And so being open to that and being thoughtful of that is really the first step. And so I encourage everyone as they leave this room today to just remember it's progress, not perfection. All right, we will open it up. We've got about a couple minutes for some questions.
We do. Hi, everyone. There are 2 ways you can ask questions today if you have a question for our speakers. You can enter it into the app if you prefer to do that, or if you just want to do it the old-fashioned way, I have a microphone I can toss to you, or I can walk over to you. So if there's any questions, let me check and see if any are coming in on the app. So far, nothing is in, so you guys might be off the hook for Q&A. But does anyone have any questions? Otherwise, we'll go ahead and thank our speakers for their wonderful session today.
Oh, yeah.
Yep.
I'd love to hear from the panelists how you guys have focused DE&I efforts in your recruitment for each of your companies. What have you found success in recruitment?
Did you hear?
So the question, just so everyone hears it, how have you within your organizations focused on diversity with regard to recruitment? Anyone want to jump in there?
I think it's just natural for me. And now obviously I'm an earlier stage company, so I don't have sort of the quantity of numbers. But thinking when I was back in Amex, obviously everybody's looking at metrics and there's a fight for talent, and you definitely have to make that conscious effort, I believe. You have to find the right sources. By the end of the day, I think the value system is what really is sustainable. Right, okay, I can look for that, whatever it might be, that diverse candidate and all that, but there's a fight for those diverse candidates. I'm on board of a PE-backed firm, and they are trying their damnedest to bring on talent. They cannot bring them on because, they're, I hate to say it, they're a collection of white males that are a little, older, and so they aren't attracting that talent, right? So I think it has to come from the foundation. It has to grow over time. I've been lucky, as my mentors at Amex were a lot of women, right? And of color too. And it was beautiful. I learned a lot from that, right? And it sort of just comes more naturally. I think there's, as a large organization, I think you need to make that concerted effort. But ultimately, I think the values itself of the company get reflected as people go through that process, if you want to call it that.
I can share just within Expedia Group, we do think a lot about diversity in the recruitment process and making sure that we are screening a diverse set of people, that we are interviewing a diverse set of people, and so that we do have there's a whole list of obvious, again, metrics that are included in that. I think, though, that it does come down to also having a little bit of a personal accountability for your own team that you think about. And it also is recognizing sort of which industry that you play in and what the dynamics are of that industry. So for myself specifically, I oversee essentially a marketing organization. Marketing typically can tend to skew more female. And so I am taking active measures all the time to ensure that I have a good female-male ratio, because then I really want the diverse perspectives of a diverse set of people on my team. So it's a little bit more company supported, and then personal accountability as well.
Yeah, I'll just add from a CJ perspective, it's very much an operational focused effort. It's actually so fitting because at the back of the room, manning the door, is our head of recruiting, Dawn, and I work very actively with her on ensuring that we are being really thoughtful and mindful about the types of candidates that we are working with. So from an operational standpoint, or if you're thinking, how do I do this? A lot of it comes with training. We have undergone quite a bit of training to ensure that we're doing inclusive hiring, ensuring that we are aware of biases that we don't even realize are there. And so that's been really helpful. Even myself, as I was going through it, I was like, oh, wow, like there were so many things that stood out that I hadn't realized were potential biases. In addition to that, a lot of it comes with the types of questions you're asking. The type of questions you should not be asking is also important. And then another thing I would say is also outreach programs. Who you are aligning yourself with as an organization is really critical to your recruitment flow. So if you are working with the same walks of life that you have all this time, and they all look like you're doing something wrong. And so you need to make sure that you are expanding and scaling just like you would as marketers from a recruitment standpoint. You need to be reaching out to those communities, those colleges, those different co-op programs that are going to reach those who may not have a college degree, but have the grit enough to come and be successful at your organization. So being open to those things, I think, is the biggest piece that I especially have learned in our last year or two, especially at CJ, is having all of those things in mind. So that's been very fruitful for us. All right, any other questions?
Any other questions? All right. Here, let me bring the microphone over to you, Ben, so everyone can hear what you're asking.
I'm a CJ person. I'm not a plant, I promise. I was wondering if you could speak to, based on completely on your experience, about accountability. A lot of times we associate accountability with negativity, negative consequences. And if there's any guidance you can give us based on your experience on accountability and encouraging sort of more towards the positive side of accountability.
Yeah.
That makes sense at all, by the way?
Mm-hmm.
Hopefully.
Yes. I do. I think that my personal experience, and that I had my son, that really was a forcing function for me to get to better understand the disability space. I felt incredibly ignorant and foolish that I wasn't aware of so much of the amazing work that is done in that space beforehand. I wish I could go back to myself a couple years ago and really ring the bell and say, like, there's so much more out there that you should be knowing about, whether it's around disability, whether it's the Black culture or the Black community Expedia group, whether it's the Asian community Expedia group, whether it's our Pride group, our women's group, the veterans group. There's so much out there. I think that one of the things that we can do at Expedia is, as I said, we really are trying to almost force function people into even understanding that a lot of these groups and a lot of this awareness needs to be focused on. I didn't have the awareness before. I'm damn sure going to make this really, really accountable for the rest of my team and the rest of everybody that I know at Expedia to know that these resources are there and that you should really be digging in to better yourself. Because now I am a better person, I'm a better mom, and I'm a better employee because of my experience that I've had and really leaning in to some of the IBG groups that we have. I hope that answers your question.
I think I would add, just from a professional standpoint, it is really focused on, it starts with leadership. I think that sort of paves the way for those to understand that this is the expectation. If it doesn't start with leadership, I think accountability becomes really difficult. From a personal perspective, I mean, honestly, they could just watch Lovey's session from earlier and, just not be that person who says, it ain't my business. And you will be working towards being more accountable.
One last thing to add here, I'll just go harken back to my big company days. So I hate to use this, but it's about the reward of your compensation, right? Amex is geared around goals and leadership. Leadership was broken down into 12 criteria. One of the criteria was being diverse and acting with integrity, right? And that affected effectively your rating, which is on a 5-point scale. On the goal side, there was a component around employees, and employees had diversity components to it. So you can actually improve your GNL, as it's called, on the 5-point scale, and it'll drive a lot of your compensation because there was probably 30% impact on your bonus structure. So I think accountability, comes in that form, but also I think accountability comes within your personal, exactly as you
Yeah.
mentioned, about how you act, how you feel, and the steps and actions you take.
Yeah.
All right, it's actually all the time that we have for Q&A, but if you have other questions for our speakers, I'm sure they'd love to have you corner them at the front of the stage or at the back of the room. But thank you, everyone. Thank you for a great panel.
Thank you so much.